The air wasn't just hot. It was chemically saturated, thick with the metallic reek of brass casings and the sweet, burnt smell of expended C4. My M60 belt was down to the last 15 rounds, and the barrel smoked like a chimney in a blizzard, glowing faintly orange even in the heavy shadow of the triple-canopied jungle. We weren't fighting for ground. We were fighting for the space immediately around our lungs. 10 minutes ago, Razor Team had walked straight into a kill zone, a meticulously planned horseshoe ambush set deep in the Ia Drang Valley, the kind of trap that usually chews up entire platoons and spits out bone fragments. Sergeant Cole, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the topography of combat fatigue, screamed above the continuous roar, his voice somehow cutting through the symphony of death. "Miller, traverse left. Burn that goddamn machine gun." I locked onto the muzzle flash. My thumb found the butterfly trigger, and the 60 hammered against my shoulder, the noise and obscene ripping sound that momentarily drowned out the smaller pop of AK-47 fire and the wet thud of incoming grenades. I saw the enemy gunner flinch, then slump. The fire slackened, a small, terrifying lull. That's when the terror truly hit. Not the terror of dying, but the terror of knowing we had just committed an atrocity of noise and fire in a world designed for silence and shadow. We had broken the ambush, pushing through the center instead of trying to flank, which was suicidal genius on Cole's part. We took casualties. Doc was patching Reyes's leg wound with a shocking amount of speed and sterile gauze, and Jenkins was sprawled too still beside a tangle of elephant grass. His helmet rolled away like a discarded tin can. We had survived the immediate kinetic explosion of violence. We were 5 men left, dripping sweat, covered in mud and spent powder, miles from anyone, having announced our exact location to every hostile ear within 5 square kilometers. Cole, panting, dropped beside me, slapping a fresh belt into the M60. His eyes weren't focused on the tree line anymore. They were focused on the deep green curtain beyond, the endless, indifferent jungle that was already swallowing the echoes of our battle. "Check your ammo, Miller. We buy time now. Every minute is a gift. The hard part isn't the fighting, son," he whispered, wiping a streak of black carbon from his cheek. "The hard part is convincing the jungle that you belong here, and the jungle just heard us screaming in its damn face." The silence that followed the gunfire was monstrous, heavy, filled only with the frantic chirping of insects returning to their posts, the sound of water dripping off huge banana leaves, and the labored, shaky breathing of men who knew they had just exchanged a quick death for a prolonged, agonizing interrogation. The triage was swift, grim, and efficient. Jenkins was confirmed Kia, a clean shot through the temple. We couldn't carry him, not on this route, and the jungle was hungry. Cole made the hardest decision, covering Jenkins with his poncho and marking the spot with a subtle blaze, promising to circle back if they were ever lucky enough to be allowed back to this miserable piece of earth. Reyes, meanwhile, had shrapnel in his thigh, a nasty, ragged wound that Doc had sterilized and bandaged tightly. But it wasn't enough to stop the dull, continuous ache that was already setting his teeth on edge. Doc was a magician with morphine, but they were running low on everything else: water, energy, and hope. We started moving west, low and fast, through vegetation so dense it felt like swimming through mud. We moved for 2 grueling hours, every step agonizing, every branch snapping, sounding like a thunderclap. Finally, Cole led us to the designated point, Hill 813. It wasn't really a hill. It was a rise, a small, desolate hump of ground that offered a decent line of sight, but also presented a perfect silhouette against the surrounding valley floor. It was a strategic anchor, and that's exactly what Command wanted: a roadblock, a 5-man sacrifice to slow down the estimated 2 companies of NVA they believed were repositioning for a larger assault on a nearby firebase. Cole keyed the PRC-25 radio. The static was louder than the voice, but the message was clear and chilling. Hold Hill 813 for 72 hours until a tactical extraction could be coordinated. 72 hours. 3 days. It sounded like a geological epic. The exhaustion of the recent fight faded, replaced by the crushing weight of the assignment. We weren't waiting for reinforcement. We were waiting to be found. We began digging. The soil was a stubborn, clumpy red clay, moist and unforgiving. We used our e-tools until our shoulders burned and our hands were blistered, carving shallow, claustrophobic fighting holes. Every scoop of dirt felt like a minute shaved off our lives. Reyes, despite his injury, sat slightly apart, nursing his M16 and staring at the perimeter, his lips moving silently. I knew what he was thinking. Why stop moving? Why sit still in the crosshairs? But Cole knew better. Moving meant exposure. Staying meant inviting a siege, but at least we had dirt between us and the incoming rounds. The afternoon sun beat down, turning the hilltop into a steam cooker. The humidity was a physical weight pressing on our chests, making every breath an effort. By the time the sun dipped below the western ridge, casting long, menacing shadows that looked exactly like men crawling toward us, we had established a pathetic 5-point perimeter. We had survived the firefight, the immediate trauma, but now the second, far more insidious battle was beginning. The fight against the empty clock, the internal erosion brought on by the complete and utter certainty that death was coming, but having no idea from which direction or when the delivery would be made. The first night on Hill 813 was defined by its overwhelming, suffocating silence. It was the kind of silence that wasn't the absence of sound, but the deliberate cessation of everything important dash. All the little buzzing, chirping, and scratching sounds of the jungle amplified tenfold, acting as a constant distraction, a million tiny knives chipping away at our focus. We established a 2-hour rotation, 4 men watching, 1 sleeping, or trying to. My first watch began around 2,300 hours. The moon was obscured by thick cloud cover, and the blackness was absolute, so profound I couldn't distinguish the barrel of my weapon from the air in front of it. I relied entirely on sound. The jungle floor was a carpet of decaying leaves and broken bamboo, and every gust of wind rustling the canopy sounded precisely like cautious footsteps. I gripped the M60, its cold steel reassuring against my sweaty palms, trying to regulate my breathing, forcing slow, deliberate inhales. The heat didn't dissipate at night. It just became heavy, moist, turning the air into a humid blanket that clung to the skin. Sweat stung my eyes, and every time I wiped it away, I worried I had missed something vital in the darkness. We were listening for the metallic click of a safety being disengaged, the sound of a shovel scraping against rock, or the unmistakable low, guttural murmur of Vietnamese voices. But there was nothing, only the relentless drip, drip, drip of condensation from the leaves, which sounded like a slow leak in the plumbing of my own sanity. I kept staring into the blackness, trying to conjure shapes, seeing movement where I knew there couldn't be any. This was the start of the psychosis. The mind, starved of visual input, begins to manufacture it. I saw faint, shadowy figures moving between the trees, dissolving the moment I blinked. I found myself having to whisper the mantra Cole had taught us: sight, sound, smell. Be sure. But how could you be sure when the jungle was actively lying to you? Around 0100, a different sound started, distant but unmistakable. The muted, metallic clanging of heavy objects being dragged through thick mud, perhaps a kilometer or 2 down in the valley. Mortars. They knew exactly where we were, and they weren't rushing. They were setting up. They were establishing their firing solution, taking their sweet time, enjoying the fact that they could hear our hearts beating while we had to listen to their methodical preparations. This wasn't a tactical maneuver. It was psychological torture. Cole stirred in his hole, just a few feet away, sensing the change in the soundscape. He didn't speak, but he tapped the stock of his M16 against the dirt 3 times, a silent acknowledgement that the clock was ticking faster now. The enemy had confirmed their presence, not by attacking, but by showing us they were patient. They were confident, and their confidence was the scariest weapon they possessed. Day 2 dawned not with the sunrise, but with the immediate, crushing weight of heat and buzzing insects. The exhaustion was now a constant, low-grade fever burning in our muscles. The true enemy wasn't the man in black pajamas. It was the lack of sleep and the relentless sensory distortion created by the environment. The sun cooked the exposed clay of the ridge, releasing a musty, organic odor that mixed sickeningly with the sweat and oil on our gear. The sensory war intensified. Every single creature in the jungle seemed to be participating in our slow-motion breakdown. The monkeys were the worst offenders. They would chatter furiously in the trees, a sudden burst of high-pitched noise that mimicked a shouted command, or sometimes, horribly, a distorted, mocking laugh. I watched Reyes, whose wounded leg was throbbing and whose face was slick with a sheen of fevered sweat, react violently to one of these bursts. He jerked his rifle up, fingers white on the trigger, before Cole grabbed his forearm and shook his head slowly. "Monkey, Reyes. Just a damn monkey." Reyes slumped back, his eyes haunted. "Sounded like an order, Sarge. Sounded like they were fixing to rush us." Doc was distributing water, rationing it down to a few sips every hour. He was the anchor, his professional demeanor holding the fraying edges of the team together, but even he was showing strain. His usual easygoing temperament was gone, replaced by a grim, meticulous focus. He wasn't just treating Reyes's leg anymore. He was administering mental first aid, forcing conversation about anything but the ridge, baseball, cars, the stupid details of life back in the world. But the jungle fought back against these simple human sounds. It started manufacturing its own voices. I swore I heard my mother call my name once, a clear, sweet voice carried on a non-existent breeze. I snapped my head around, heart leaping into my throat, before realizing the absurdity. Cole saw the reaction and nodded slowly. "Happens to everyone, Miller. It's the juice. Not enough oxygen in the brain, too much terror. Your head will try to give you anything to make sense of the nonsense." But it wasn't just auditory. The visual environment was deteriorating too. The dense foliage, the constant weaving shadows started to form patterns. Faces in the leaves, the outline of a tunnel entrance beneath a tree root. I found myself focusing so intently on a specific section of jungle, a wall of green, maybe 50 yards away, that the shapes began to swim, melting and reforming into something predatory and moving. I was fighting the landscape, constantly arguing with my own perception. Every instinct screamed, move, hide, escape, dash, but the mission required absolute stillness. The duality was tearing us apart. The knowledge that the enemy was out there, patient and lethal, and the knowledge that the man inside your own skull was the one pulling the pin. The relentless, heavy compression of the atmosphere, physical and psychological, reached a critical point early on the third day. We were operating on maybe 2 hours of fractured, shallow sleep since the initial fight. Our systems were running on pure adrenaline residue and the desperate need to watch the next watch. We were brittle. Miller's grip on reality was eroding fastest. He began picking at his skin, scratching imaginary insect bites, his eyes red-rimmed and darting. He whispered to Cole that he could smell incense, the kind used in funeral rites. Cole, who was fighting his own demons, responded only with a low grunt, signaling that he heard but didn't believe. Reyes, sidelined by his wound and the fever that now pulsed visibly beneath his skin, was the first to fully break the silence. "Sarge," he rasped, his voice raw, "they're not moving the mortars anymore. They're digging in right now. I hear the shovels." Everyone froze. We listened, straining against the background noise. I heard nothing but the usual racket of the cicadas and the distant, throbbing hum of the generator back at the firebase, miles away. Cole leaned over, putting his ear close to the ground. After a long minute, he shook his head slowly. "Nos chaves, Reyes. Just the wind through the leaves. Your fever's talking. No, Sarge. No, it's rhythmic. Slow. Thwack, thwack. It's coming from the south perimeter. They're tunneling under the wire. I know it." Reyes was convinced, his eyes wide and pleading for validation. The real horror was that we couldn't definitively say he was wrong. The dense jungle-absorbed sound. Maybe he, closer to the ground, was catching some faint acoustic signature that the rest of us missed. This is where the trust begins to fracture. You rely on your squad mate for survival, but now his mind is lying to him and potentially leading you all into a trap. We were facing a terrifying internal question. Do you trust a man who is clearly losing his grip, or do you ignore him and risk a silent breach? We were soldiers trained to react to observable threats, muzzle flash, movement, direct communication. But this enemy was intangible, seated within our own terrified minds. The silence, the waiting, the lack of confirmation, it was a weapon far more effective than high explosives. It turns friends into potential liabilities and certainty into ash. Sergeant Cole, seeing the fear solidify in our eyes, knowing that morale was about to evaporate, did something unusual. He took a long, slow sip of the last canteen of water, his face stone cold, and then spoke directly to the air, ignoring us for a moment. He spoke about the core of the fight, what truly keeps a man sane when everything else screams danger. Dash, we are built for bursts of violence. We understand the calculus of combat. But the waiting? That's where the enemy wins without firing a single round. When the external threat vanishes, and the only enemy is the one inside your mind. The doubt, the fear, the exhaustion, which is harder to fight. The bullet or the silence. When you're cornered, which do you rely on more? Your training or the unbreakable, instinctive trust in the trembling man next to you? I want you to truly consider that, because every man who has fought this war has faced that demon. He paused, meeting our eyes, then looked straight ahead, seemingly addressing the camera he didn't know was there. He then added, if any of you watching have ever been pushed to your absolute mental limit, where your senses lied to you, share your thoughts below. What brought you back to reality? He then turned back, his gaze harder than granite. Reyes, if you hear a shovel again, you tell me where. But you don't touch that trigger unless I say so. We stick together, even when our minds try to pull us apart. The incident with Reyes, while seemingly minor, had exposed the gaping fault lines in our team's shared reality. Cole knew we were compromised. He moved methodically around the perimeter, not checking the wire, but checking us. He examined our faces, looking for the telltale signs of complete psychological surrender. The vacant stare, the excessive fidgeting, the sudden manic bursts of false energy. It was during this round that he found the deliberate trap. Halfway down the south slope, nestled perfectly within a tangled vine of morning glory, was a tripwire. It was clearly strung, taut, visible against the red dirt, perfectly placed to trigger an explosive device. But there was no device. He traced the wire with his boot, finding where it terminated, a small metal stake driven firmly into the ground. It was a bluff, psychological feint designed to make us believe that the wire was everywhere, that we were surrounded by hidden mines and booby traps. This was sophisticated, patient terror. The NVA weren't using conventional tactics. They were using our own paranoia against us. They had scoped the ridge, recognized we were weak, and decided to let us defeat ourselves. Cole didn't cut the wire. He left it there, an active, visible reminder of the mind games being played. They want us looking down, Miller, he explained, his voice low and raspy. They want us thinking about the next step, not the incoming fire. They're playing chess, and we're running low on pieces. The physical decay was now matching the mental. Reyes's wound was visibly angry, the skin around the bandage swollen and weeping a yellowish pus. Doc had run out of proper antibiotics and was relying on a painful series of saline flushes and sterile gauze changes. The smell of infection permeated the small perimeter. Every time Reyes shifted, a stifled cry of pain escaped his lips, a constant acoustic barometer of our declining situation. We were trapped in a rat cage, and the enemy was simply watching us run circles until we collapsed from exhaustion. The heat was unforgiving, baking the exposed skin and turning our fighting holes into suffocating ovens. We were conserving water so fiercely that our mouths felt like sandpaper and our urine was dark and thick. Dehydration amplified the hallucinations, making the shadows dance more vigorously. I spent an hour trying to decipher a conversation I thought I was hearing, only to realize it was the sound of a large bamboo stalk cracking slowly under the pressure of the heat. It sounded exactly like the word trap being whispered repeatedly. I wanted to scream, to fire my weapon into the air, to force a reaction, anything to break the suffocating pattern of waiting. But the discipline drilled into us over months of training held the thin barrier between control and complete hysteria. We were 5 sweating, hallucinating ghosts sitting on a grave, waiting for the tenant to arrive. The true climax of the waiting game wasn't the sound of incoming fire. It was the sharp, panicked sound of Miller's M60 tearing the silence in half. It happened just after 300 hours on the third night. Reyes was feverish, barely conscious. Cole and Doc were in a shallow sleep. I was on the northern flank, my eyes burning from the exertion of staring into the unrelieved blackness. I hadn't slept for 60 hours, not really. My mind was a kaleidoscope of fear and exhaustion. I was listening to the jungle again, but this time the sounds were too clear, too specific to be random noise. I heard a low, foreign voice. It wasn't the phantom whispering of the wind. It was distinct Vietnamese, clipped and sharp, perhaps 5 meters outside my fighting hole. Then I heard movement, a slow, careful dragging noise, as if someone was pulling a body or heavy gear over the rough ground. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, frantic drumming. They were here. They had finally made their move, creeping in silently, waiting for the ultimate point of our exhaustion. I raised the M60, my mind screaming. Sight, sound, smell, but there was no sight, only the oppressive black. I relied on the sound alone. I whispered to Cole, "Movement, north," but the whisper was swallowed by the air. The dragging sound stopped. Then a faint sound, the scraping of metal against metal, right at the perimeter wire. Panic detonated inside me. I bypassed the command structure, bypassed the discipline, and yanked the trigger. The M60 roared, a furious, blinding stream of tracers ripping into the blackness, cutting sways through the thin trees, spraying the area with 7.62 millimeters depth. I fired for a full 30 seconds, emptying a belt and a half, until the metallic clicks signaled the weapon was empty and the roar subsided, leaving a ringing void in my ears. The sound was deafening, terrifying. Cole was instantly awake, grabbing his rifle, demanding, "What? Where?" The whole ridge was awake, adrenaline flooding our bodies. Doc and the others were scrambling, checking their sectors. I pointed a trembling hand toward the northern tree line, where the tracers had punched visible holes through the foliage. Right there, voices, movement. Cole crawled past me, his face grim, and fired a quick burst toward the area just to confirm. Then he waited, listening for return fire, listening for cries of pain, listening for anything that would validate the furious expenditure of ammunition. But there was nothing, only the sudden, shocked silence of the jungle creatures. After 5 agonizing minutes, Cole slowly crawled out to the perimeter, covering the 100 feet to where I had fired. He was back in under 2 minutes, his face completely devoid of expression. He dropped back into the hole, looking not at me, but at the empty belt links scattered around my feet. "It was nothing, Miller," he said, his voice flat. "Nothing but trees and dirt. You saw ghosts." The devastation wasn't tactical, it was spiritual. I had wasted vital ammunition, exposed our position again with a massive display of panic, and forced the entire team to accept that one of us, one of the crucial 5 points of their defense, had completely fractured. Cole didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just looked at me with an awful pity, an expression that confirmed the deepest fear. The waiting had indeed nearly killed us all, and the weapon was still holstered inside my own skull. The aftermath of the false alarm was a heavy, suffocating blanket of resignation. Cole confiscated the remaining M60 ammo from Miller and redistributed it among the other 2 functioning men, not as a punishment, but as a practical measure against further impulsive meltdown. The discipline, the fire, the fear, it had all burned away, leaving only ash-like exhaustion. We were too tired to argue, too tired to be truly scared anymore. We had reached a state of morbid tranquility, the calmness that descends when you know the final outcome is inevitable, and all you can do is wait for the executioner to arrive. The morning of the last day, hour 65, was strangely peaceful. The heat was present, but less oppressive, perhaps because our bodies were too dehydrated to sweat properly. We sat in our foxholes, silently, sharing the last half-cigarette Cole had found crushed in his breast pocket. Doc cleaned Reyes's wound again, the infection now so advanced that the entire area was hot and swollen, giving off a terrible, sugary sweet odor. Reyes didn't complain, just stared blankly at the sky. He had moved past fear and was now just inhabiting the pain. This moment, stripped of combat, stripped of psychological warfare, was the most honest, bonding experience we had. We talked quietly, mundane things filtering through the haze. Cole mentioned his wife's terrible cooking. Doc talked about the fishing boat he hoped to buy when he got back. I spoke about the silence of the Nebraska prairie, a silence so different from this malevolent jungle hush. We were saying goodbye to the little, irrelevant parts of our lives. It was a truce of total exhaustion, an unspoken agreement that the fight had taken everything from us already, and the last battle would just be a formality. We were no longer fighting to survive. We were fighting not to die alone. Cole finally spoke the truth, his voice barely a rasp. Look, we know they're coming. They've been circling, waiting for us to eat ourselves alive. Miller already saw the ghosts. Reyes is running on fever. It's going to be messy, but when they come, you don't worry about the perimeter. You worry about the 3 feet on either side of you. You watch the man next to you. If he goes down, you pull him back. If you can't pull him back, you avenge him. That's all that's left. He looked directly at me. Miller, you stick to the M16. You watch the north flank. If you hear a noise, you wait. You look. You smell. You make sure the shadows aren't lying to you one last time. The sun climbed higher, casting the entire valley in a harsh, bright light that offered no mercy. We listened, not for footsteps or digging, but for the sound of air moving, the telltale whistle of a mortar tube, the wind rush of a grenade. The psychological siege had achieved its main objective. We were broken, but not yet defeated. We were ready to simply receive the blow and hit back one last time. The attack, when it finally came, wasn't the slow, methodical assault we had anticipated. It was chaos delivered at hyperspeed, brutal, and terrifyingly close. It happened at 0645 hours, just when the jungle heat was starting its relentless climb and we were at our most depleted. It wasn't a frontal wave of infantry. It was 2 sappers, highly trained infiltrators, who had crawled undetected to the base of the ridge. They didn't hit the flanks where we were looking. They hit the center, Reyes's position, with satchel charges. The first blast was a blinding white concussion that threw dirt and pulverized rock 20 feet in the air. The sound was so massive it temporarily stole our hearing, replacing it with a painful, high-pitched whine. Before the debris had settled, the second charge detonated. Reyes, blessedly, was likely dead instantly, vaporized where he lay. The goal was pure terror and demoralization. Cole didn't hesitate. He stood up in his foxhole, ignoring the shrapnel stinging the air, and screamed, "Perimeter break. Center. Throw everything you've got." The rest of us reacted instinctively, firing into the smoke and the chaos. The sappers, realizing their cover was blown, began maneuvering for another set of charges. One of them broke cover, running low and fast, aiming a flash of metal. An AK-47 at Cole. Cole returned fire, his M16 spitting out 3 rounds, hitting the sapper squarely in the chest, who stumbled and fell. But the second sapper was faster, already halfway to Miller's position, ready to toss a grenade into the M60 pit. Miller, fighting the residual tremor of fear and the memory of the false alarm, hesitated for a split second. But then the training, the pure, raw instinct took over. He wasn't thinking about ghosts or shovels. He was thinking about Cole, exposed and vulnerable, and Doc, busy covering the center flank. He reached blindly for the Claymore mine detonator switch, the front towards enemy side, facing the charging sapper. He slammed his palm down. The anti-personnel mine detonated with a sharp, crackling rip, unleashing hundreds of steel ball bearings in a lethal 60-degree arc. The sapper disintegrated in a puff of red mist and torn foliage. The sudden, overwhelming violence of the attack, though brief, shocked the NVA command, which had assumed we would be too paralyzed by the siege to mount any meaningful defense. They had expected a soft target, not cornered beasts. After the detonation, there was a deafening, echoing silence once more, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of shock, of tactical confusion on the enemy's part. They hadn't committed the main force yet. Cole lowered his rifle, the sweat running down his face, washing paths through the grime. "Check the lines. Doc, you got eyes on Reyes?" Doc, pale and shaking, merely pointed to the crater where Reyes had been. The bond of the squad had held, but the price was absolute. We had survived the ultimate physical attack only because the psychological breakdown had paradoxically hardened us for the final burst. We held our positions for the next agonizing hour, expecting the main NVA force to sweep in and finish the job, but they never came. The loss of the sappers, elite troops who represented a significant investment, must have disrupted their plan, forcing a tactical reassessment. Or perhaps, and this was Cole's terrifying thought, they were still waiting for us to collapse completely. The ridge was a smoking ruin, smelling of ozone, cordite, and fresh blood. Reyes was gone, reduced to mist and memory. Doc was trying to consolidate the remaining ammunition and water, his hands shaking violently, the strain of the entire 72 hours finally manifesting. The relief was not joyous. It was simply a profound physical draining. We were too tired to grieve, too shell-shocked to celebrate. Then, at exactly 0800 hours, we heard it. The familiar welcome, an impossibly loud whomp 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 of rotary blades approaching from the east. The extraction Huey. They had made it. Cole frantically keyed the radio, spitting out the code phrase, confirming our survival. He popped smoke, yellow, the color of confusion and extraction, hopefully not target marking. The Huey appeared over the canopy, a magnificent, roaring machine of salvation that seemed impossibly loud after 3 days of enforced silence. As the helicopter dropped low, churning the air into a storm of leaves and dirt, the relief was so sharp it was almost painful. The pilot didn't land. He hovered, the door gunner already laying down, suppressing fire into the surrounding trees, a nervous reaction to the obvious signs of recent combat. We scrambled forward, half crawling, half stumbling through the wreckage of the perimeter. Doc helped the barely walking Cole, who had taken a piece of shrapnel to the arm, and I grabbed the remaining gear. I didn't look back at the crater where Reyes lay, but the memory was already burned into the back of my eyelids. As I pulled myself aboard the vibrating floor of the Huey, the noise of the engine and the blades was a physical assault, a jarring return to the world of kinetic reality. But it was a beautiful noise, the sound of reprieve. I strapped myself in, staring out the open hatch at the scarred, devastated hilltop of 813. It looked less like a battleground and more like a sacrificial altar. The jungle around it remained silent, indifferent. The noise of our departure instantly dissolved into the vast, unending green. We had survived the bullets and the bombs, but the memory of the waiting, the sound of the phantom shovels, the scent of the funeral incense, the terror of firing into the empty dark, those wounds were invisible, already festering deeper than Reyes's infection had ever gone. The true battle of Hill 813 wasn't fought against the NVA, but against the insidious, silent enemy of the mind. And that enemy had won a long-term victory.